Hello, my name is Andrej Baranovskij and I'm very happy to present my session on this Django conference. The session will be about how to build modern web applications with Django using Alpine.js, HTMX and Tailwind. My background, I'm working quite a lot with Python, machine learning, and in the past I was spent many years working with Java Enterprise, building web enterprise applications. But for the past few years I am busy with machine learning and implementing different enterprise use cases in machine learning field. And to build UI for machine learning, I'm using Django because I found it quite good because you can quite easily define the model and models, model forms, views, and then you render UI data like a table structures, forms out of this definitions that you created in Django backend, and this helps to create clean UIs, and it helps to enforce correct data when user is saving data and so on. And I decided to look into HTMX because HTMX helps to execute partial requests with Django without reloading the whole page when user submits data, but you execute just a partial request with HTMX. Yeah, so let's first of all, probably first thing first, let's look into the application that I'll be talking today about, and this application implements table. And there's an edit button for each row, so we can click, for example, edit for the first record, and we get editable form below the table, right? And what you can do here, you can change any value, for example, 2, press save, and you see that data is saved successfully, and it's instantly updated on a table above, right? So as expected. And as soon as you edit any record, you can see all the other buttons are disabled, so you can edit records just one record at a time. You press close, edit functionality is enabled. Let's open the last record for Steven, and if we try to, for example, I'll try to put some email which is not unique. For example, let's use this value and try to save it, and to get back validation error from Django, because there's a unique constraint in Django model which checks that email field value must be unique for all the users. So there's validation as well. Okay, so this is the application, and my idea was to have something simple use case, but the same practical, with where you would be able to update data, and we could see how validation works, how we can return validation errors back. Then we have multiple regions on this page, like table and also edit form. And when we successfully edit data in form, we update another region. And for that, we're using HTMX event, which is returned back with on successful save, and then HTMX library is able to get fresh data for the table and so on. So there are quite of those interactivity use cases here, which probably would be useful for your own applications in terms of practicality. Right. So if you switch to the application, so let's see what kind of HTML templates we have here. So here's a base template, and in the base template we import Tailwind CSS, and by the way, we're using Flowbyte library to implement all the UI for the table, for the fields, and for so on. For other elements like buttons, for example, Flowbyte is open source library. It comes also with JavaScript support to implement interactivity, but we are not using any complex components from Flowbyte here, so it's enough just to include a Tailwind, and that's all. Then Flowbyte styling would work. We're using Alpine.js to implement interactivity, like to disable the button or hide the edit form and so on. So for that we include Alpine.js, and HTMX is the main library which helps to implement a partial request, get back response, and display this response in the parts of the page. So we include HTMX for that. Okay, then we have index page which extends from base, and here we include some static div with text. Just to demonstrate that when we are running HTMX request, we are not reloading entire page. Portions of the page they stay without any reload. We include employees HTMX here inside the index, and employees HTMX comes with two blocks. First block is table, second one is the form, and we're using Alpine.js attributes directly on divs. With each show attribute, we refer to the show edit form variable. By default, it's false. This means this div is hidden. And when we are clicking edit inside the table, then this variable is set to true, and then div becomes visible. We hit cancel button inside edit form, then we set value false to the show edit form variable, and this variable becomes it gets value false, and the edit block becomes hidden. So we can check that, and for that let's open view table and edit form. So in the view table, this is the edit button, and we see this Alpine.js on click event listener. It says show edit form equal true. This means when we hit the button, then show edit form becomes true and edit block is visible. And we're also using disabled. We're overriding disabled property for the button, also using Alpine.js. And this means that when variable is true, then all edit buttons are disabled. And later, when in edit form we'll set this variable to false, then buttons will be enabled, and user could hit edit form for another record to edit the data. So this is over here. We can go to the bottom. There's a close button or cancel button, and we set show edit form equal false. This means the form becomes hidden and edit buttons become editable. Okay, so that's about the structure of the UI templates, and now let's look into the how the models are defined for that application. So the main model is employees model. So table and edit form are rendered out of this model. There's a set of fields defined for the model, like a last name, email, hire date, and so on. All the fields are assigned with attributes like a max length, primary key, max digits, decimal places, and so on. Right, so also we have ordering is being specified for this model, and there are a couple of constraints, like check constraint. It checks if salary, it's enforcing the rule that salary must be positive, and there's a unique constraint. It checks that email value must be unique for all the records, for all the employees. There are a couple of foreign keys defined, one for manager ID, second for department ID, and also there's a foreign key for job ID. For manager ID foreign key, it points to itself, to employees model, because managers are also the same employees, right? And there are two other classes defined, one for department model and another one for job model. So those models are used to implement foreign key relationship for departments and for jobs. Right, so this is the model definition, and as soon as you define the models in Django application, then you need to run Django migrate utility and construct a local database structure which would correspond to the model class as you defined, to all the fields, constraints, and attributes. And then out of the box, you could fetch data from that database, and you could push data as soon as data is updated, and so on. Right, so we got models. Next, we also discussed models. We discussed check constraints, and now let's look into the forms. So since we have a model, we can define Django model form on top of the model, and we can specify in the model form which fields we want to display on UI. And also we create some sort of widget configuration here for the hire date. We specify that hire date field is a date input field. And later on UI, when form will be rendered, then like a calendar component will be automatically attached to the hire date field, which is great. It comes out of the box. Right, and another huge advantage of model forms that you can do validation right away, right here inside the model form. And you write a method called clean, then field name. So clean email, clean salary, and so on. So when you hit save, and all those methods will be executed automatically for you. You don't need to call anything by yourself. All the methods will be executed, and you can enforce rules inside those methods. If some of the rules will fail, then the transaction will stop, and validation text will be reported back to the caller, and it will be propagated to the UI and reported back to the user. So in clean email, for example, we check that for the email format. In clean salary, it's a bit more interesting here. What we have over here, we get current job ID for the current employee that we are trying to update data. And we get salary value, and later we get through the foreign key relationship, we get minimum and maximum salary for this employee that we are currently working with. And we can check if the salary that we are trying to save, if the salary is in a range between minimum and maximum, as it is defined in the foreign key relationship. If the new value doesn't fall into this interval, then we report back the validation error. So this is how it works. Okay, this is model form. Next, let's take a look into the views or URLs. So on the URLs, we have one root URL, which points to the index. Then there are two URLs that work with employees data. First one, it returns list of employees, and the second one is responsible to handle post request when we actually executing post request and submitting data to update a specific employee. Also, it can work to get employee, because when we pass primary key to this request, we could get information about specific employee and render data of that employee in the form. And I'm using Django browser reload plugin to be able to refresh application automatically when you do any change in code. When you click save, then the application is reloaded in Google Chrome automatically. In Safari, I think it doesn't work this way, but in Google Chrome it works. It helps to save lots of time and improve developer experience. Okay, now let's look into the views. Let's look into the views and let's see how they're implemented. So first, this index view. It returns index.html as a main page of this application. And in a get method of this class, we are fetching all the employees, and this list of employees included into the context and return back with Django render function, and we're also returning the template name. So what this means, if you go back to the employees HTMX, this means we are bringing the content for this first view, which renders the table, view table, this one. And over here, we got a loop for employee in employees. We are basically drawing the records for employees data. So this employees variable is coming through the context that is defined here in the view. Right, and yeah, another thing is, so that's for the main page, and later we're using employee table view. If you look into the URLs, yeah, we're using it also to bring back the list of employees through this one. And it's being used when we are doing refresh, when event is received from the edit form and we want to refresh the table, then we're using this this view, and it's basically a similar thing. The only difference is that we are not returning the whole index page. We are returning only view table HTMX template, which contains only the table. And because when something changed inside the edit form, then we don't need to reload the whole page. We just want to redraw the table, and we're returning the template with the table only, and also all employees, all the data for the table. And the third view is edit view. So in this case, we're returning the edit form. And over here in the get method, we are getting by the primary key, we are getting entry for the employee to be displayed in an edit form, and we're constructing employee model form with the instance of employee, including this form into the context and returning back with the template. And this is how edit form is displayed. And there's a post method for this view because we're handling data update in this view. So what happens here, actually what we do here is we get information about the employee data that we're updating right now. We're constructing the instance of the form, and we're validating the form. And this will trigger all those validations defined in the model form, also in the model, all the constraints and so on. If everything is fine, then if there are no validation errors, we're hitting save. Data is saved, and then we're returning success. We're returning the same form back, and also we're in response, we're including HTMX trigger with name employee changed. And when this event employee changed would be received and detected by HTMX, then we'll have subscriber logic which will trigger refresh for the table, and this refresh for table would execute employee table view and fetch fresh data to be displayed in the table. In case of the error, then we're not doing anything like that. We are then just collecting list of errors, and we're returning the same template, which is edit form HTMX, and we're attaching to this template list of errors that will be displayed on UI. Now we'll see how to implement HTMX get. So when we are hitting edit button, this one, so we click edit, right, and we get back edit form visible. Visibility is controlled by Alpine.js, and we are fetching employee data through HTMX get request. So we are not copying data from the table, we are executing separate request, and and this could be valid for multiple reasons. One of them is that maybe not all data would be present in an HTML table row, and maybe you would want to fetch additional fields for the edit form, so you would like to execute a separate request. Then if you look into this button definition, yeah, so this is Alpine.js stuff over here, and then we get we define attributes on top of HTML button that are specific to HTMX library. So first on get, then there's a target and swap. So in get we execute Django expression language using URL expression, and we are referring to the edit employee URL entry, which is defined in URLs file, URL script, and we are passing as a URL parameter employee ID. So from the current record that we are working right now, where user is pressing edit, we are getting employee ID from employee object, because all the roles displayed in a loop, and employee refers to the current role. And as a target for this HTMX get event, we are specifying edit form. So this is over here. If you go scroll up, this is the edit form is defined. So this form which renders editable data. And we're using swap attribute outer HTML. This means when a response will come back for the target edit form, we would like to replace it with whatever HTML response would come from the backend. We would redraw it basically. And let's look into the what is the edit employee. So edit employee is defined over here, this one, and it's a Django path that points to the edit employee. We pass primary key, and we are referring view class employee edit view. So if we open it again, so employee edit view is over here, and we'll execute get request. We get primary key from the URL parameter, and we get employee model. Then we initialize instance of employee form, and we pass it back through the context. And we're passing data, the form context, and we are passing template name edit form HTMX, this one. And all of this is sent back as a Django through the Django render function, and HTMX is taking care for this definition. It says that it will replace target with ID edit form. So whatever response is coming back, it will be included into this target. Right, and it's important to mention that if you look into the edit form, so each of the edit elements is implemented with render field, for example, and we're referring here to the form, first name, and so on. So form is coming from the context, and this is the attribute name. We're using placeholder and using class from the flow byte to have a nice representation of this UI component using Tailwind implemented by the flow byte, right? And to render the form fields to automatically get validation functionality and so on, we're using, if you look into the base settings, and on top of that over here we're using widget tweaks plugin, which helps to render nicer form elements for Django. And if you go back to the page, if I try to type something like that and save, yeah, it gets invalid email as expected. And yeah, if the first name, or if I remove the last name, because this last name is set as required field in Django, then we get back the information that please fill in this field. And yeah, this is comes from those widget tweaks out of the box, so we don't need to code this functionality. So part of the validations are returned like this one, when on model fields you define attributes like length or required, for example, then those kind of errors will be reported immediately on the field. And all other validations, like constraints and validations that you define in a model form, they'll be reported on save over here. And let's see also what happens when we hit edit button. Let's see what kind of request is coming back. So if you go to the developer over here and developer tools, network, and I hit edit button, we see that get request for employee with ID 5 was executed. Okay, sorry for that. And if I move it a bit up, under the request headers, okay, this bunch of stuff is printed, and there's a response, and let's see the actual response that is coming back. So this is it's a not whole response of the whole HTML page as you would expect, but this is the partial response. It's only the form is included, this edit form that we see here. And yeah, this response is based on HTML template as we have defined, and the name for this template is edit form HTMX. And in views over here, and in employee edit view, we are returning edit form HTMX over here, and we're returning instance of employee form that was constructed based on a primary key. Okay, so yeah, and later it's HTMX job to include this response into the main HTML page and render it without refreshing the whole stuff. Okay, we can close it, and now okay, let's open another record. Yeah, let's open maybe some different record. This one for Alexander. And now let's look into functionality of when we're actually clicking save button, and what happens when we click save button. So for that we go to the edit form, and below here we have a save button. It's of type submit, and this button is wrapped by the form, and this means when we hit submit button, then form will be submitted. And on top of the form tag, we using HTMX post, trigger, swap, and include attributes. And there's a hidden input defined with name ID. And from the form instance, we are passing primary key of the current data that is displayed of ID of the current employee. And this hidden input will be used by HTMX post request to send it to the backend. So we have a post, and again we're using Django expression here to reference edit employee URL. And I experienced the problem with initial rendering when this edit form is hidden. Then because edit employee URL pattern expects primary key, then it breaks if there is nothing, no parameter passed by default when form is in a hidden state. So I'm including 0, and it's working fine. And later when we have a real primary key, we are sending it through this hidden variable, so as a workaround in this case. So we have we're using as a trigger for this execution submit, and this is the submit event we're getting from the button, and we swap outer HTML basically because we are redisplaying, rendering the same form, so the form content will be displayed with the again when the response will come. Yeah, and if you look into the URLs, so edit employee is the same path as we were using to fetch employee data by key. So in this case, we are using the same path, but we are posting data using the key. Okay, and this is visible under employee edit view class as well, because we have we override post methods over here, and what this post method does, it reads hidden variable from the request ID. If it's not none, we are getting it and assigning it to the primary key variable, and getting the employee records for this primary key, and constructing the form instance with the employee information, and all the values that were updated on the UI in the form, they are automatically submitted with the ID, with field names, and Django automatically maps values with field names. It maps all this data that is coming from the UI. It maps with the actual model form fields, and populates the model form with the new data, and later when we execute form is valid, then it validates new data. And as I mentioned before, if validation is successful, then we are actually saving the data and returning back the context with along with HTMX event. If there are validation errors, then we are returning list of errors and display it on the UI. Okay, so next we'll see how the table is updated when we are changing data in the edit form. So like in this case, let's say that we update the salary to be 9,500, save, and to check for Alexander, the salary was updated. Okay, and also if we look again into the developer tools, let's see what kind of network action happening in this case. So let's say that again we do one more update, 9,600, hit save. So we get in this case one post request, so we're submitting the data, and in response we're getting back the form. Then we get back to I think there are two get requests. Yeah, so, and in response we get back the table over here and over here. So there are basically two identical get requests. This is not ideal, but yeah, this is how it works, and I didn't manage to find solution to run single request in this case, but yeah, maybe it will be improved in the future. But the whole point how it works, it's using HTMX event. So let's look into the flow again. So what happens when we hit save button? When we hit save button, we submit the form with HTMX post, and we actually put we include the hidden element ID or through here to be able to refer to the employee ID that we're updating right now. Okay, and then we look into the views. So this is the post thing, and when there are no validation errors, when everything is fine, we hit save and we construct the response context with the message success message, which says data saved successfully. So we construct the response this way, and additionally we include HX trigger with the name employee change. Employee change is a custom name, and we return back this response. Right, and what happens then is because what we want to do, we want to refresh a table, right? Since we updated the data in edit form, and we have on top we have a table that displays the same data, and we want this table to be refreshed automatically in the same request. We don't want to hit any other button to reload the table. And we got the table inside view table HTMX over here, and this is the table definition. And we define on top of a table tag, we define HTMX get. We refer to employees, and if you double check, here we have employees path defined right here. Employees path, it refers to employee slash, and we refer to employees table view. And if we go back to the views, then this is where we have employees table view. So employees table view is very similar to the index view. The only difference that it's using different template. So probably you could we could use a single class and have some check from where this view is being initialized right now. But I thought for the simplicity and for the demonstration purpose to put those views separately. And what we have here is we get all the employees, and again we include those employees into the context and return with Django render. We return the context, and also we return view table HTMX as a template. And view table HTMX, it's actually the template that contains table itself. So we return back the table and return back the new data that will include all the changes that were saved already inside employee edit view over here, because we saved and we return back the event. And if you look on the table tag again, we'll see that we're using new HTMX attribute over here. It's called trigger. And over here we need to specify event name employee changed, and this is equal to employee change event from here, from the post. And we specify that we listen for the employee change event from body, and body is a root tag in this page, and when event is propagated, then it will be cached by the body anyway, and HTMX will be able to catch the event. And when this event happens, then the magic HTMX magic happens, and it's able to detect the event. And when event is detected, then on top of this table element, HTMX get request will be executed. And since we don't specify any target here, this means by default target will be the same tag by itself. And yeah, when the response comes, since we are returning the same template for the content, then it means that the current table will be simply replaced. Table will be replaced with the new HTML structure and with new data, so it will be re-rendered. And if you go back to the UI and do a couple of more tests, we'll see how it happens. So let's say that we close this block, and let's open Lex, the third employee, And if we go and change the job, maybe as accountant, click save. Yeah, it would not work because probably accountant salary is not in range with the current Lex salary, so it would not work to change. We return back to be administration vice president, and if we maybe change the manager to Nina, yeah, then it works. And if you go back, we see that the information about the manager was instantly updated to Nina. This means, as expected, this functionality works great because we work on one section on the screen, do changes there, execute request, and through HTMX events in different areas of the screen, we can catch event and refresh the data. Let's look into the error reporting. So there are a few cases when we report errors in this application. For example, when we want to update salary to be negative, then we get invalid salary must be in range, but actually, yeah, there is a constraint that is enforcing value to be positive, but before that we check salary to be in range also. So in this case, it's 15,000. So if we say that we would like to update to 10,000, then the same validation error will be displayed. Also, if we change the email to be non-unique value, then another validation error is displayed. What else? If we try to save data and remove value for the required field, then we'll get field level validation, and this out of the box with it comes from those from the plugin which renders the form elements. It shows this kind of errors that are defined based on Django model attributes, like required one. This kind of thing is displayed directly on top of the field. So we don't need to worry about that. But about other validation errors that enforced on model form, or about constraints that are defined on the model, we need to think how to report them. And in this case, we report them below the table, just one by one. And on the other hand, if we fix it, for example, let's say this one is 16,000 and email will be LD Han, for example. We save, then we get the message that data is saved successfully in this case. So the way how it's implemented, first of all, either successful or error messages are reported from view, from the post method for the employee edit view over here. If it's success, then it's included as a success context, either error context. And later, inside the edit form, here below, we got a div with feedback, and we include partial info HTML. So this is the partial is over here. And inside this partial, we have two blocks that are wrapped into the Django loops. So first one is loop that display errors. The second one is that displays success messages. And we're using flow byte styling to display those alerts. Yeah, as many error messages we have in a loop, we display all of them. If there are none, then basically loop is empty and no messages displayed. And this means every time when we return this block for the editable form, also info partial is being evaluated, and we check here if there are any errors. Then basically text about errors will be displayed, and if success messages list is not empty, then it also will be displayed. Yeah, so it's quite simple, and this means later on the next request, if we fix validation error and there's no error anymore, then list with errors is empty, and it simply doesn't print out any message anymore. So this is how error handling is done in this application. So hopefully it was useful for you, and you'll find some practical value for your own use cases. I was trying to keep it as simple and practical as possible. Source code for this application is available on GitHub, and it's you can refer to it and try to run application on your own environment and implement the same stuff for your own use cases. So thanks, and it was a pleasure.